I would appreciate us staying relevant so that I don't have to be interrupting, and I would really appreciate minimizing the number of comments I have to make. I would just like for us to be able to go from member to member and maximize the time with the minister. With that, we have with us appearing the Honourable Marco Mendicino, Minister of Public Safety, and alongside the Associate Deputy Minister Tricia Geddes from the Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. Minister, you will have up to 10 minutes for opening comments. I would just remind you to official languages, so maintain a good pace for interpreters. And with that, thank you for replying to us so quickly and being here. Welcome to PROC.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Bonjour tout le monde. First, I would like to acknowledge the presence of my Associate Deputy Minister for Public Safety, Tricia Geddes, and to begin by thanking all of the people that get up every day to protect our country's democratic institutions, the people that work with them, and all Canadians. The security of Canada's democracy is of paramount importance, and the safety, security of our national institutions is thanks to them. Foreign interference has become an increasingly pervasive threat to democracies worldwide. Des acteurs hostiles comme la Russie.
Hostile actors like Russia and the Chinese Communist Party are attempting to interfere with Canadian security and our national security.
But the challenges surrounding foreign interference have become more complex and insidious and are constantly evolving. That is why our government has taken strong action since forming government in 2015. Madam Chair, let me explain to the committee the 4 pillars that underpin our plan to combat foreign interference: prevention, protection, accountability, and transparency. First, all good strategies must start with prevention. L'initiative citoyenne numérique.
The Digital Citizenship Initiative is helping us to protect our democracy by increasing citizens' resilience to foreign information and disinformation by building partnerships to support a healthy information ecosystem.
Through the DCI is the Canadian Digital Media Research Network, which is undertaking activities to help Canadians become more resilient and to think critically about the information that they consume online. Within the federal government, my predecessor, Minister Blaire, issued a letter to all parliamentarians in 2020 providing information and resource support to them. And as you know, Madam Chair, CSIS continues to provide briefings to parliamentarians to better understand how to protect themselves and their offices from foreign interference. Second, we are increasing protection. We're mobilizing new tools and resources to ensure Canadians, including parliamentarians' safety. This includes most recently increasing funding for the RCMP of $48.9 million to protect Canadians from harassment and intimidation by foreign actors, increase its investigative capacity, and to proactively support communities most at risk of being targeted. We're also working with the Sergeant-at-Arms and the PPS here on the Hill to provide more security for parliamentarians and their staff. And we have recently established a new National Counter-Foreign Interference Coordinator, which is being headed out of my department at Public Safety Canada. Third, we are making sure that we hold hostile actors more accountable. La GRC a indiqué.
The RCMP has indicated that it had ended the foreign interference activities by the so-called police stations and has carried out some 100 investigations into this matter. The RCMP will always remain vigilant. My colleague, Minister Joly, recently expelled a diplomat that was interfering on behalf of Iran. We continue to use all the leverage that we have as a government to make foreign actors accountable.
As you know, the creation of a foreign influence transparency registry, as we have concluded the official public consultation phase of that exercise, in particular, working with and engaging diaspora communities so that we can create this new tool in the right way. And finally, Madam Chair, we know that transparency is fundamental to countering foreign interference and to building the trust and confidence of Canadians. We're taking lessons and recommendations from the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. I've already mentioned two very concrete examples on which I am leading the implementation of those recommendations through the creation of a national coordinator to combat foreign interference, as well as the creation of the Foreign Influence Transparency Regime, as well as NCIRA, and most recently the work that was completed by the Right Honourable David Johnston in his first report, a report that does lay out a path forward to continue through a public exercise the engagement of Canadians so that they better understand how it is our national security establishment is equipped to fight against foreign interference. Our government and our national security agencies being more open than ever about the threats that we are facing is the best way to protect and strengthen our democracy. But of course, Madam Chair, we know that foreign interference has an impact well beyond our elections and elected officials. All facets of Canadian society need to be protected from this potential threat. Madam Chair, when individuals in Canada are subjected to intimidation, harassment, or manipulation by foreign states or their proxies, these activities are a threat to our sovereignty and to the safety of all Canadians. They will never be tolerated, and law enforcement will independently take the appropriate actions that are necessary. With several federal by-elections fast approaching, the Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force has been activated to ensure the protection of our electoral processes. When it comes to our economy and society writ large, we know that academic institutions, energy and technological sectors, and many others are a vector for this threat. Madame la Présidente,
Madam Chair, all these measures and all of these investments are aimed at prevention, protection, accountability, and for transparency being our four pillars that I mentioned. We want to avoid partisan politics in this. Everyone has a moral obligation to ensure that we deal with these matters and protect our citizens and the parliamentarians' rights,
such as foreign interference and disinformation. But I want to reassure all members of this committee, in Parliament, and indeed Canadians that our government will continue to take all of the steps that are necessary to mitigate those threats to our national security landscape, including by tackling foreign interference. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Minister. We will enter into 6-minute rounds, starting with Mr. Cooper, suivi par Monsieur Fergus, puis Madame Michaud, et then Mrs. Blaney. Mr. Cooper, 6 minutes through the chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Associate Deputy Minister, for appearing this morning. Through you, Madam Chair, to the Minister, the Director of CSIS, when he appeared at committee on Tuesday, confirmed that the issues management note of CSIS that warned that MP Chong and his family were being targeted by the Beijing regime was sent to the Deputy Minister of Public Safety. What happened once it reached the Deputy Minister?
Madam Chair, I want to thank my colleague for the question. I think as you said, Mr. Cooper, you heard the CSIS director indicate his intentions about that memo. You also heard very clearly from my predecessor, the public safety minister at the time, Minister Blaire, say that he did not receive that memo. What I can assure you, Mr. Cooper, and to the members of this committee, is that through the ministerial directive that I have recently signed off on, that we have strengthened the ability of elected officials to be briefed on these issues.
That's fine. Just say you can't answer it. What happened once the memo reached the Deputy Minister of Public Safety?
What I can tell you is very clearly the intention of the CSIS director and the fact that Minister Blaire did not receive that memo, but that has been addressed through the ministerial directive that I have implemented.
To your deputy minister. So have you instructed your department to open an investigation to find out what happened to that memo once it reached public safety? Yes or no?
Madam Chair, we have addressed this issue through the ministerial directive, which requires CSIS to directly brief me where there is foreign interference in parliamentarians as well as the Prime Minister.
So I take it from your answer that the answer to that question is no. So for you, Madam Chair, Minister, when you last appeared before this committee on April 27, you said unequivocally and without qualification, quote, "The RCMP has shut down the so-called police stations," closed quote. We now know that that isn't true, at least as of April 27th, when you appeared before this committee. The Beijing United Front Work Department organizations that host 2 illegal police stations in Montreal have said that no action has been taken against them. Jody Thomas, the Prime Minister's National Security and Intelligence Advisor, told this committee on June 1st, when asked how many illegal police stations are still operating, she answered, quote, "We are aware of 2 in Montreal, and work is being done to ensure that they cease to operate," closed quote. That means they were still operating as of June 1st, contrary to what you said on April 27th. Why did you tell this committee the opposite of what is true?
Well, the first thing I want to make abundantly clear, Madam Chair, and to members of this committee is that the RCMP have consistently said that they have been on top of this issue by disrupting foreign interference activities in relationship to the so-called police stations. Now, Madam Chair, as you know, that does not mean that there may not be future efforts. But I am confident that on the basis of the authorities and the resources that we have provided to the RCMP, they will be vigilant. And you've heard most recently from Commissioner Duheme, who appeared before this committee himself, to confirm that the foreign interference activities in regards to these so-called police stations will continue to be disrupted in a timely way.
Minister, with the greatest respect for you, Madam Chair, you can't talk your way out of this. You made a statement on April 27th. You didn't provide any qualifications. It was an unequivocal declaration that all of the illegal police stations were closed. Jody Thomas, when she appeared before this committee, contradicted exactly what you said. And I did listen to the RCMP when they appeared before this committee 2 days ago, and upon pressing the RCMP, they appeared to acknowledge that at least one of these stations is still operating and an investigation is underway with respect to the other in Montreal. So you provided this committee with inaccurate and incomplete information in what I would submit, with the greatest of respect, was a deliberate attempt to mislead this committee and mislead Canadians about illegal police stations operated by Beijing on Canadian soil. Respectfully, Minister, how can anyone believe anything you say?
I stand by my statements before this committee. The RCMP have been clear and consistent in regards to these foreign activities in relationship to the so-called police stations. Madam Chair, I encourage all members of this committee to continue to listen to the RCMP because they are providing timely, accurate briefings. They carry out those operations in a manner that is independent from the government, but I am confident that the government has provided the RCMP with the tools and the resources and the authorities that are necessary to deal with these foreign interference activities.
You misled this committee, and that's a fact. And I would submit no one can believe anything you say. How many arrests have been made in connection with Beijing's illegal police stations? Just a number.
Madam Chair, I'm pleased to reiterate what Commissioner Duheme told this committee just a couple of days ago, I believe, which is that they are advancing approximately 100 investigations in regards to foreign interference.
Arrests have been made. You know the answer to that, Minister. The fact that you're unwilling to say it, I think, speaks volumes to your unwillingness to come here and answer straightforward questions. So how many have been arrested?
Madam Chair, a couple of points because I want to be responsive to my colleague's question. First, the fact that there are 100 investigations ongoing reflects how serious this is. But second, the fact that
I'm going to pause because, you know, Mr. Cooper, I was actually going to give you the floor back because the beep beep went off. I'm like, oh, he's kind of hearing what I'm saying. It's taken a bunch of meetings, but we're getting there. Awesome. High fives. I'll throw you back the floor, get you to get one more question, and we go on our way. We hear the beep beep beep. You know what my reaction's going to be, and then it's almost like you like it. So with that, I find that odd, but everyone got the show. We feel better. Great.
Can I?
Minister Mendicino, the floor is yours, and then I'll be going to Mr. Fergus.
Thank you very much. I'll try to be concise in my response, Madam Chair. First, the fact that there are 100 ongoing RCMP investigations into foreign interference shows they're taking this matter seriously. If there are arrests, obviously they will be updated by the RCMP. But lastly, let's not underestimate the value of the ability and the capacity to disrupt those activities, which is precisely what the RCMP has done in regards to the so-called police stations.
The number is 0.
Wow. Mr. Fergus.
Mr. Fergus, thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Minister, for being here before the committee today. My question
regarding the police stations, we had the RCMP come here and they had testified that they have disrupted the illegal activities at these locations. But they added an important caveat. The caveat was that these buildings and locations still are there, and that there are other activities which are perfectly normal and perfectly appropriate that go on at those activities. So to say that we've shut them down would be an overstatement. It would be to say that those activities have been shut down. Do I have a correct reading on that, Minister? And do you have anything further to add on that?
It's very important to make the clarification that foreign interference activities in regards to the so-called police stations refers to the activities themselves. And I would add something else, and that is the resources that we are giving to the RCMP through Budget 2023, as I said, roughly $49 million, is a way in which we can be sure that we can better protect Canadians, and specifically diaspora communities who are often the target of foreign interference activities. So, Mr. Fergus, what I would say through you, Madam Chair, is that it was disappointing to see that Conservatives did not support Budget 2023. They often talk tough on national security. They talk tough on foreign interference, but they voted against a budget which would have given the RCMP additional capacity to deal with the very foreign interference activities that you're talking about. And they've also voted against other authorities that have would equip our national security establishment with additional tools to fight foreign interference.
Minister, as a follow-up to that, what are the challenges that you have in confronting, what are the challenges that you have with folks conflating the nefarious activities of the police stations with these community centers?
Madam Chair, that's an important question because the geographic locations where these so-called police stations are located attract people for, totally legitimate purposes. So they could be going to the same space to participate in extracurricular activities or to be getting other essential supports. And it is, my assessment that is one of the challenges that is presented, is just really distinguishing what are legitimate activities from potential foreign interference activities. But I think we need to be very sober about the reality that the PRC is deploying a wide array of tactics when it comes to foreign interference, not only through the so-called police stations, but equally through our economy, through our academia, through other attacks on our democratic institutions, which is why the way in which I structured my opening remarks lays out the plan that is based on prevention, protection, accountability, and transparency. So the additional tools and resources that we as a government have put into place are all about advancing that plan so that we can tackle foreign interference.
Minister, as you're surely aware, we have had substantial testimony which speaks to frankly, the information breakdown that has happened amongst our security and intelligence information sharing and the lack of coordination in that regard. What is your department, what is the government doing to rectify these snafus?
Madam Chair, that too is a critically important question. And, as the minister, I'm responsible and accountable for my office, for my department, and the agencies that report to me. And it is important to identify where the challenges have been around information and intelligence flows. So in my job as the Minister of Public Safety, by identifying that issue, I believe that we have begun to address it through the issuing of a new ministerial directive. The point there is that where there is foreign interference in relationship to parliamentarians, I'm now to be directly briefed by the service so that we can be sure that the issue is being addressed, so that we can be upfront with Canadians about how it is that we're doing that work. I would also say that Mr. Johnston's first report, a report that is very substantive, that is incisive, does lay out an additional number of steps in which we can continue to strengthen our internal governance when it comes to intelligence and information flow, because that is the best way in which the government can take the appropriate actions that are necessary to deal with foreign interference. That's precisely what I'm committed to doing.
And a final question to you or to the Deputy Minister. I'd ask this question of the CSIS Director, and I'd like to ask it of you. It seems that the framework in which we have set up the structure to respond to these issues, our whole security intelligence network was set up in response to terrorism threats. It seems that the frame has changed. How do we now adapt our structures to deal with these new and emerging, perhaps it's been ongoing emerging, but just a new way of looking at the threats which we face by foreign interference now?
I'll say a few words and then I will turn it over to ADM Geddes, but I think what your question touches on is the need to think about how we frame national security concerns. You're right, since 2001, in which in the wake of the 9/11 tragedy, the government put into place a national security strategy. Today, yes, of course, we continue to be vigilant against anti-terrorism, but we also have to think about foreign interference.
Sorry, thank you. When the beep goes, we can't pass it to the ADM, but maybe there'll be another opportunity. Madame Michaud.
Madame Michaud. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for being here this morning. It's much appreciated. I want to shine some light on the issue around the intimidation of the member for Halton Hills, Weltington Halton Hills. But first of all, I want to talk to you about the transparency of what you have said. You have said certain things here, and sometimes in response to questions, you plead ignorance. You have said certain things in your opening remarks, but including about transparency, but things are far from transparent. You are the Minister for Public Safety of Canada. You have the obligation to be informed and to answer a question. You say that you haven't been briefed, the notes were lost, and so on. So how do you explain that as the minister responsible, you should be the first to be informed, and you don't seem to have been? Madam Chair? I would like to say through you to my colleague, Ms. Michaud, that yes, as the Minister for Public Safety, it is my duty to ensure that there is a system in place, that information flow is effective and strong and well organized. And this is why I have taken measures to reinforce measures within my department in that regard. There have been problems in the past, but now I am taking measures so that Canada can take the effective action it needs to deal with foreign interference. Now, Madam Chair, I would like to ask a few questions, a series of questions, and to show that the minister has said some things, but then other things turned out to be the facts. Now, you said that the police was responsible for emergency issues, and now you're saying the opposite. Now, the Emergency Measures Act was invoked because we had an unprecedented situation. The decision to invoke the Emergencies Act was the result of consultations with the police forces, and this is exactly what I said before Justice Rouleau. Justice Rouleau checked into this, and these were the right decisions. He confirmed that. My time is short, and so I would like to just have short answers, please. The same situation arose with respect to the so-called police stations organized by the CCP. You said that they had been closed down. Mr. Cooper pointed out earlier that that wasn't the case when you had set up. Our colleague, Mr. Cooper, asked the question, and I will repeat my answer. The RCMP has taken concrete action to deal with the so-called police stations, and the RCMP will remain vigilant about those activities. You said a few days ago that you were not informed about the transfer of Paul Bernardo from a maximum to a medium security institution. You hadn't received information, but we have found out since that you were sent the information. Now, did the information not get to you? What is the truth?
Mr. Turnbull, point of order.
I know I was a little bit late getting here, but my understanding is we're studying foreign interference today, specifically a question of privilege. I don't know if this question is relevant. I'm just wanted to point that out and seek your advice on that.
I did actually at the top of the meeting remind us that I know that on Parliament Hill everything is important, and that's why we do like a whole list of important things. One of our colleagues has brought up the issue of foreign interference on a question of privilege that was sent to this committee, which I hope I'm never in that position, but I would hope that as an elected official, my question of privilege would be given the importance that it needs. So I would encourage us to stay on that topic as well. There's always something more exciting happening. So the time is yours, Madame Michaud, but we are here on the question of privilege related to the member for Wellington Halton Hills and other members. Est-ce que vous voulez garder votre question?
Do you want to maintain your question, or would you like to ask a different question? I would like to maintain the question and say to my colleague, that Mr. Turnbull, that all of this reflects the lack of transparency and the contradiction, and this is part of the issue with respect to our colleague, the member for Wellington Halton Hills. When a number of times we've had these contradictions by the minister time after time, I think that it is part of a bigger picture. How is it that we learn from the media or from leaks that our colleagues, members of parliament, are the subject of threats and intimidation by foreign actors, including the Chinese Communist Party? How can the minister come before us and say he didn't know anything? I'm trying to understand the situation, so I would expect answers from the minister. And I think all of the points that have been brought up today show an important thread. So I would give the minister another opportunity to explain that how it is that these briefing notes are not reaching him. The minister is supposed to be ensuring our safety, our security, and seems not to be aware of what's going on, including with respect to foreign interference. Madam Chair, I would like to thank my colleague for her question. Now, the ministerial responsibility means that the minister has to manage challenges and issues. The In response to the specific question that I was asked, I have responded to the situation by issuing a new ministerial directive so that all briefing notes will be shared with me and my office, with the government, so that we can take steps in response to these issues. That's my answer. Thank you. Ms. Blaney.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. And I admit that I share frustration with my colleagues and with Canadians about how often it feels like the story is changing from one thing to another. And what I keep hearing from the minister, through the chair, of course, is that a ministerial directive has been made and sort of now everything is good. So I guess my question is, I understand that the ministerial directive was made on the 16th of May to inform MPs if they are being targeted in any way. And I also think it's important that we make sure that everybody understands that if a new minister is appointed, that directive would have to be made again. So it's sort of a short-term solution to something that, and I'm not sure that it's actually a full solution, and in fact, it's not, but it is a short-term sort of Band-Aid to deal with this big issue. So I'm wondering, is there a timeline to move forward with a permanent legislation so that we can see this fixed in a comprehensive way instead of sort of this ad hoc Band-Aid solution, keep finding the holes to the sinking boat, patch something up and hope that it works? I'm just wondering, is there an actual plan for legislation?
Madam Chair, through you to my colleague, Ms. Blaney, the answer is yes, and certainly it remains the focus to introduce legislation that would create a new foreign agent registry as quickly as possible. I also want to assure my colleague, Madam Chair, that there is a plan, and that plan is based on the 4 pillars that I outlined in my opening remarks. Again, just to be clear, prevention, protection, accountability, and transparency. And I do agree with my colleague, Ms. Blaney, Madam Chair, that it is important that we continue to strengthen the internal governance around the sharing of information and intelligence. The ministerial directives, they do succeed through governments, and they do succeed through administrations. And the ministerial directive, which I issued in regards to parliamentary foreign interference, is a way in which we can strengthen those protocols. So, yes, to use your metaphor, Ms. Blaney, there are definitely waves, but the boat is being reinforced so that we can navigate those waters.
So you're putting together what I see as needing a fundamental change in legislation to make sure that MPs are oriented appropriately, and you're mixing it up with the foreign agent registry. So I'm not clear on how come you're putting those two things together. So I guess my first question is, what is the timeline for legislation? You didn't give me a timeline. I would like a timeline. The second part is, we know that on May the 9th, the Foreign Agent Registry consultation is closed. When are we going to get the What We Heard report?
First, Madam Chair, I was very pleased to be able to lead the public consultations on the Foreign Agent Registry. That was an extremely valuable exercise. It allowed us to engage with thousands of Canadians, both online as well as directly and in person. As my colleague said, Madam Chair, we intend to publish a What We Heard report in the very, very near future, certainly by this summer, and as a result, inform the creation of this important tool. And I would just, again, reiterate that this tool has to be seen against the backdrop of all of the other concrete actions that the government has taken to date when it comes to foreign interference, including by giving new authorities to CSIS, including by raising the bar on transparency through NCCOP and NCIRA. And when we talk about the next steps, including legislation, what you have is a very comprehensive plan to deal with foreign interference.
So my next question is on the diaspora. We know that there have been long-term communities that have come forward to talk about the challenges that they're facing on a personal level with foreign interference that have largely gone ignored. So I'm wondering, in the consultation process, how did you include these communities? And then in the rollout process of the foreign agent registry, I'm wondering how you're working with those communities to make sure that the rollout is done in a way that is friendly and doesn't target the very people we are trying to get to share with us.
Madam Chair, Ms. Blaney makes a very important point. One of the lessons from the public consultation on the registry was that there is fear of retaliation from within diaspora communities if they engage in any public discussion. And so as we think through the next steps on consultation once we table the legislation involving the registry, and indeed once we continue to engage Canadians more broadly on the suite of other legislative reforms, which we may want to visit again, we do need to turn our minds to creating atmospheres which are safe and secure so that Canadians feel as though they can step forward, give their best advice, give their best feedback into this without being worried about targeted or being marginalized or stereotyped, which is the whole point of foreign interference. So it is critically important that we do create those conditions that will allow them to engage so that we can bring them along in this discussion, build their trust and confidence. The stakes are very high, Madam Chair. What's at risk here is our capacity to fight against foreign interference. To do that, we do need to bring along Canadians, and that's our commitment.
Thank you.
Thank
we'll
you,
now
Chair.
go into 5 minutes to Mr. Calkins, followed by Mr. Nur Mohammed. Mr. Calkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to the Minister. Minister, do you know what an issues management note is?
Yes.
Is that your final answer? I'm jesting.
Okay.
So already you're ahead of your predecessor, who is now verbally sparring with CSIS over the information exchange that should have happened in relation to MP Chong. So prior to issuing your ministerial directive, can you tell this committee how many of your issues management notes you've personally read?
Madam Chair, I want to thank my colleague for the question. I obviously briefed routinely, weekly, often daily on issues. The point of the ministerial directive was to ensure that there's good intelligence, stronger intelligence flow from our officials to the elected branch of government. So we feel as though we've strengthened internal governance on that point.
So my specific question is, you've indicated that you know what an issues management note is. They've been around, according to CSIS, since 2015. My specific question is, do you see each issues management note issued to you by CSIS? Yes or no?
I will see issues management notes. They take different forms. Some come directly from the department. Some come directly from elite agencies. Some come directly from my staff. What's important is that there is a dialogue and there is a flow of information so that in my capacity as Minister of Public Safety, I can appropriately be upfront with Canadians about any issue that touches on national security or public safety, and that where appropriate as well, I exercise certain ministerial authorities to protect Canadians from issues like foreign interference as well.
So in the context of being upfront with Canadians and establishing the credibility of what's being said here so that we can formulate a report and have proper recommendations going forward. Minister, in January of 2022, you talked about getting advice from law enforcement asking for the triggering of the Emergencies Act, which we found out not to be true. In October of 2022, you had an issue where you misled a federal judge by backdating documents. In January of 2023, you had an issue about the safe third country agreements working effectively and miscommunicating that to Canadians. In April of this year, you had to scrap your amendments to Bill C-21 after saying you weren't targeting law-abiding hunters. In May of this year, you indicated that CSIS never shared intelligence that the communist regime had targeted Mr. Chong and his family, which we now know is not true. In May of this year, you talked about police stations still being open, which is, we know now, categorically wasn't true. And now we know that not only did the Correctional Service of Canada tell your department and your ministry in May of this year, but you were also CC'd on that same memo from your own boss, who forwarded it on to your department or your ministry. And last night, reading through Twitter, your boss and through the Prime Minister's office has said that they sent you that same note, and there was no indication, according to this reporter, that you responded to the Prime Minister's office, and that the Prime Minister's office found out on the 29th, the day before you said you found out on the 30th, that Paul Bernardo was being transferred from a maximum security prison to a medium security prison. It is.
Point of order,
I'm
Mr.
I'm trying to establish credibility of the witness, Madam Chair.
This isn't a courtroom, but okay.
Point of order, Mr. Turnbull.
Madam Chair, it's the same point of order as last time. I just wanted to ask for relevance. I don't know how Mr. Calkins thinks this is relevant to foreign interference, which is what we're here to study, but I'd really like to know how this is relevant to our current study.
So I was just waiting to see where the question was landing, because Mr. Calkins has been around a long time, so he knows how this works. And I was hoping that we were coming back into it. So perhaps that was the case, Mr. Calkins?
The issue is the information that's being shared is being blamed not only by you, but other ministers of the Crown as not getting the information. There is no doubt in my mind, Madam Chair, that the minister had the information about this transfer and had the information about all the other things pertaining to Mr. Chong and every other issue I said. So given that, Madam Chair, I'm going to ask the minister if he can do the one thing that I think he knows he should do. He has a microphone in front of him right now with all of the issues that have been caused under his watch and the issues specifically pertaining to my colleague, Mr. Chong. Will he do the honourable thing and resign right here, right now?
Madam Chair, I'm focused on one thing and one thing only, and that is doing my job to protect the safety and security of Canadians. That question is so posed with, is riddled with inaccuracies and falsehoods, it doesn't even begin to warrant an answer.
Thank you. I will just say because I love watching The House because I'm cool and hip like that, I do believe that we are actually, a motion was moved in the House on a similar topic, which means the Chamber is seized with that issue. And here I would ask that we try to get to a response to the question of privilege from our colleague and to foreign interference in elections. But I can just try. Mr. Nur Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister and officials for being here today. You know, I came today because I'm keenly interested in the issue of foreign interference, and I've been surprised that we haven't really had much of a focus from opposition colleagues on foreign interference. So perhaps we can come back to the issue of the day. One of the things that, you know, in my time as a public servant in public safety at PCO, under 3 different prime ministers of different political stripes, I recall there was a substantial level of concern dating back to the time of the Macdonald Commission around the notion of how do we share intelligence. This has plagued Liberal governments, it's plagued conservative governments, and no doubt we are here having a similar discussion today. So, Minister, when you think about the path forward, because I think one of the most important things we can establish is how do we make sure in context of the question of privilege that we build a safer environment for Canadians. What are some of the things that need to happen in your view or that are already happening to ensure that we get right how we address and deal with intelligence and how we ensure that we don't conflate the notion of intelligence with actual evidence?
This is an issue, Madam Chair, I'm extremely concerned about, and it takes me back to my days as a former federal prosecutor when I dealt with cases involving national security, and indeed one of the biggest challenges that continues to confound not only Canada but many democracies is understanding how it is that we transition from actionable, credible intelligence to admissible evidence, which can be used in a court of law to prosecute and hold those who are responsible for committing acts that pose a threat to public safety and national security. One of the things that the government is very much focused on doing is revisiting that particular question. And that can be done through legislation. There are currently Canada Evidence Act provisions that do allow for proceedings where judges get access to classified information, then make determinations based on privileges that can be asserted by the government to protect national security, to protect the people that work within those institutions, with the relevance and the probity of that evidence, so that they can then be used in open proceedings. I will say, it is a very challenging exercise, and we have to strike the balance correctly. So as you pose the question, and I'm not just talking about yours, but as the government poses that question, we do have to really think through the evolutions in the threats to our national security landscape. You talked about coming back to foreign interference in this discussion today. Mr. Noor Mohammed, Madam Chair, through you to him, I could not agree more. The stakes have never been higher. We have to set aside the partisanship. We have to set aside the distractions. We have to be focused on the issues at hand, because what's at stake is our democracy, our economy, and most importantly, the Canadian people and their safety and security.
Thank you, Minister. My next question, Ms. Geddes, I have had the privilege of working for people who have sat in your seat who are incredible public servants. And so it is always a privilege to ask our senior-most public servants questions around some of these issues that you live every day. You know, we live in a world right now where we hear all the time, well, if everybody had access to this information, we wouldn't have the problems that we do. Can you just bring us back to why it's so important to distill intelligence in a way that allows people to make informed decisions, and the material risks of just putting everything that might be collected in the realm of intelligence into the public domain?
So thank you very much for the question. I have worked in the national security community for some time, and I can tell you that one of the most important drivers is for us to make sure that the people that are providing us with that intelligence, and people are putting their lives sometimes at great risk to provide that intelligence, that we are paying very careful attention to how we can take that very sensitive information that we have received and find a way to be able to convert it into either advice so that the government can act on something, so that we can turn it into evidence, as the minister described, or that we can use it for action. But in so doing, those are really important pieces of intelligence that we want to be able to use. But in so doing, we have to be incredibly conscientious about how we're able to protect those people that have, in many cases, put their lives on the line to be able to give us that information.
So if you were then to take what you have just said and you consider some of what is being discussed in the public domain, and I'm not asking you, this is not a partisan question, this is a question that I think I would like your answer as a public servant. Do I not have another minute, Madam Chair?
No, it's 5-minute round.
Oh, I guess not. Okay, well, thank you very much.
I would like you to put Mr. Noor Mohammed, do you want to just put your question on the record real quick?
Sure. Yeah. The question I was simply going to ask is, in the context that we now operate in, when you talk about risk, you talked about methods and sources. What are the risks to the way in which Canadians might respond if we didn't take those steps?
Thank you. I know, what a tease. This was because Associate Deputy Minister Geddes really enjoyed the last answer, so I would love to hear that answer in writing, because we're limited in time. Madame Goudreau, 2 minutes et demi.
Merci beaucoup. Madame Goudreau, you have 2.5 minutes. For the third time, you're here, and it's quite a challenge, I know. Is it usual for a Minister of Public Safety not to get the information regarding public security and issues? Well, through you, Madam Chair, it is very important that the Minister for Public Safety receive the information about these issues, and this is where I identified with the Deputy Minister where the issues were and what measures we had to take. So I think with the new ministerial directive, we are reinforcing our protocols. And yes, well, Madam Chair, the last time we met was after the budget, and we heard about that, so I'm aware of what you're saying. But how can the Minister for Public Safety not have the information? And we had to hear through leaks to the media that there were these issues. I fully share the concerns of my colleague about the leaks. There is a problem there. But I have confidence in our police services, in their investigations, and the people responsible will be brought to justice. But the government can take the necessary action to deal with these intelligence issues, knowing that that CSIS has told us that we have ministerial directives. And you said at the outset you want to focus on prevention, and you're doing your work, but we are getting these leaks, and we see that things are going in another direction. We are undermining our public safety. How can this be? Well, once again, through you, Madam Chair, we are strengthening not only our protocols, but our agencies are working to prevent leaks in the future. We have had very good exchanges within my department. Perhaps the Associate Deputy Minister would like to add a few words. I would just want to ask you honestly, do you feel that you have you failed at that point and that you are trying to come back from that? I am doing what is necessary to protect our safety.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was listening to the interpretation, so I almost missed my name. So I'm going to come back to the Foreign Agent Registry. I asked a question about how the diaspora would be included in the rollout of that program. So I'm just wondering, could I get something clear that says you're going to have a committee, you're going to have, I want to get that clarified. So that's question number one. The second question that I have for the minister is Mr. Chong talked about the defensive briefing that he received. At that time, he had no idea that him and his family, both overseas and here, were being targeted, but he did find it very helpful. So I'm just wondering, is there any movement towards having MPs all receiving some sort of defensive briefing because of how helpful it seems that it was? And how about candidates in future elections? So if you could answer those two questions.
Through you, Madam Chair, to my colleague, Ms. Blaney. First, I want to come to the question of engaging with diaspora communities. I took the opportunity to emphasize creating safe atmospheres in which we can engage them because of the heightened concerns around retaliation. But I also want to mention two other examples to Ms. Blaney, which I hope will be responsive. One is the National Security Transparency Group, and that is a group in which we seek to engage directly with diaspora and other communities, including Indigenous peoples, as well as the Cross-Cultural Roundtable on Security. So through both of those forums, Madam Chair, we are engaging directly with diaspora communities and Indigenous peoples. The other thing I'll just say, and I want to turn it back to Ms. Blaney so she can pick up on the second part of her question if she likes, is that we are working very closely with the service to provide additional support to parliamentarians as well as their offices when it comes to foreign interference. You saw in the annual report, which was tabled about a month ago, I want to say, that CSIS in the last year has briefed 49 federal parliamentarians. There's more work to be done there, and that is exactly what we will do.
And will it be expanded during elections for candidates as well?
The short answer is yes, and I would say in addition to briefings, we've also got the reporting protocols that we put into place. So I'm very pleased to work with Ms. Blaney and all parliamentarians on this issue.
Thank you. With that, it comes to the end of our time together, and we wish you a good day, Minister Mendicino, as well as ADM.